a really neat little question to ask people when they come to you with something like that is to say, what would you do if I wasn't here
Mm,
and you couldn't get a hold of me? And my advice is if the answer they give you is okay,
yeah.
not a car crash, if it's okay, then say, great, do that. Now, the temptation is just to say, oh, well, I'd do this, or and you could do that, or and you can do the other.
Mm.
Go with what they own and what they suggest. Afterwards, you can talk with them about what else they could have done and where it could have gone, but get them to the point that they own it and not you.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform. Delighted to be joining the studio today, all the way from the Leicestershire area, I believe. We have leadership speaker, educator and coach, and a bit of an author as well. TEDx speaker, just been listening to the TEDx speech before this actual call. Delighted to have on the show today, Peter Anderton. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, Paul. It's a delight to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show.
Oh, I'm sure this is going to be absolutely fantastic. We met off the back of a joint podcast connection in Jens Heitland, so big shout out to Jens, and hope this episode is as great as your one with Jens. So let's start off by giving the audience a bit of a background into what have you done to get you where you are today?
So where I am today is a leadership expert. Ah, what an awful term, expert, isn't it? So it's all about leadership, and it's about helping leaders get better results from their teams without everything depending on them.
Right,
How I got there isn't necessarily the traditional route because I'm actually an engineer by training.
right,
And the interesting thing is I've taken all those principles of engineering and brought it into organizations and leadership.
mm,
And really there's quite a strong correlation between the two. So to sort of summarize very briefly, I started off as an engineer. I was involved initially as a continuous improvement consultant, I was called at the time, which always makes me laugh because I was green and wet behind the ears, straight from university, knew nothing. But that was how I started off. Moved into the food industry, so I got tired of improving other people's areas and wanted to improve my own area.
right,
So I became a production manager in the food industry. Started off on mini cheddars
right.
and various other. I was moved on to chocolate hobnobs, which was the problem line of the entire factory. Ended up on ginger nuts and digestives. So there we go. But then I moved across from there to move into the pharmaceutical industry again in production.
Right.
But at some point, within a few years there, I shifted from production and I crossed over to the dark side and I joined HR.
Oh,
And I absolutely loved it. It was one of the best. One of my first role in HR was one of the best roles I ever had. I was happy as Larry, and as I progressed through my role in HR, I became the organizational development manager across the UK. This is when I worked for 3M. And I was working with the board on strategy, change, leadership, a whole range of different areas, working across the country. And then I set up in 2012. And everything that I do now is about helping leaders get out of their own way
right.
and helping them get the results that they need from their teams.
Oh, wonderful! And I know we were talking before recording here about the some of the parallels in our background. You know, your hobnob stories and my sausage making stories. You know, we've got that shared engineering by trade and production management route, and going into the realms of people management, leadership. And yeah, just helping others perform at their best. And that's the reason I put this show together, was to sort of highlight the great work that's done in that area, but also to sort of shine a light on the fact that there are all these different roles and ways of
Mhm.
using your skills and your backgrounds to take little turns in life, and you never know where it's going to get you. So wonderful to hear that engineer to HR into sort of leadership expert. And it always brings a smile to my face as well because I used to work for Shell Research back in the day in laboratory piece, and one of the technicians used to say to me, "An X is a has been, and a spurt is a drip under pressure." So never call yourself an
Absolutely.
expert.
So yeah, nicely put.
Brilliant stuff. So tell me a bit about what you do today. Then who do you help and how do you help them?
So there's a lovely mix actually that I work with. So I've got I coach the CEO of an organization that would measure their turnover in billions,
Right.
right the way through to entrepreneurs of smaller organizations, where you're looking at a turnover of like 30 to 40 million. So quite a spectrum
Yeah.
from a few million up to billions. And interestingly enough, starting to get others coming into the mix as well. There's been a few smaller businesses that got in touch with me, which I wouldn't initially have focused my attention on. But there's a key there's a key piece that I deliver where, and this is very appropriate for entrepreneurs, where often they've built a business that depends entirely on them,
Right. Yeah.
which is not leadership.
Mm,
And I help them create a shift where they can build a team that delivers whether they're there or not.
right.
And that allows them either to exit from the business, to retire knowing things will continue to deliver. There's organizations that obviously more and more businesses are doing things like employee ownership trusts,
Yeah.
but the business needs to still keep delivering after they've gone. So there's some interesting areas that are starting to open up and develop, which weren't where I was initially focusing my attention.
Right. No, it's certainly an interesting angle, isn't it? Because as you say, I mean, having gone into the world of entrepreneurship, shall we say, only a couple of years ago, in my scheme of things, I've always been employed, and realizing that difference between it's all about you, and if that's the route you're going, or you can take a different angle and make it into a business that isn't about you, but at some point you need to make that decision, and and generally you'll need support in how to do that as well, because it's
Yeah,
not an easy thing to
absolutely.
do, is it? No.
Yeah,
So when
absolutely.
you're working with these people, are you generally working on a one-to-one level? Are you working with teams? How do you operate?
So all of the above, really. So there's three key areas that I would focus on. So one is the one-to-one executive coaching.
Right.
As I said, I'll work with quite a wide range of leaders, senior leaders that I'm working with. The second level then is I can work with a whole team,
Right.
and I'll completely shift the way in which they're working together. When you create real alignment in a leadership team, you can achieve just about anything.
Mm.
But then I'll also work with either mixed groups or entire organizations through running leadership development events. So there's a 3-day program that I run that's absolutely transformational
Right.
because it deals with the mindset of leadership. It's not about, oh, here's a load of models and here's a load of tools and techniques. And if you learn all of these things, then maybe one day you'll be able to apply them.
Yeah.
It's about building leadership into the way that you work through building it into the way that you think.
Right.
But I'll speak at keynotes at various events and conferences with hundreds and hundreds of people. So occasionally thousands.
Right. Oh, brilliant then. And you talk there about the shift that can be achieved and the performance improvement that can be achieved by just you said about aligning teams. What does that look and feel like? Can you give us an example of generalized in terms of you've gone in, this is the situation, and where's it? What have you done to get them out the other end?
So what there are three key ingredients to a high performing team. What if I said right then, Paul, write me a recipe of all the things you need to create a high performing team. Whatever you give me, I could put into one of three columns.
Right.
One is connection. You need a team who are actually connected and coming together. You see this in national sports teams. They're packed full of stars,
Yeah.
but if they can't work together, they're consistently beaten by lesser sides.
Right.
The other is potential.
Mm.
So there's a level of skill and experience that I need, but I need to help them be at their absolute best.
Yeah.
And then the third is reason. Why should I get out of bed in the morning? Why should I care? What is it all about? What's the mission? What are we trying to achieve? And if you get those three things in place really effectively in a team, this is the kind of alignment that you create. So, when it comes to connection, Henry Ford famously said, "Get everybody moving forward together, and success takes care of itself."
Right.
If I think of an example, one organization that I worked with, we got them to the point that they stopped. And actually, I say one organization, I do this with loads of organizations. Too often, they have the real conversation in the corridor afterwards, not in the meeting room.
Mm.
So, one of the first things we'd really get to grips with in terms of what this looks like is getting them to have the honest conversation in the room, be it virtual or otherwise,
Right.
not afterwards, because that's like a cancer that eats away at a team. And that's usually where I'd start around trust, around enabling them to actually get into constructive conflict, have the real conversation.
Mm.
I'd start there. Then there's an element of how you actually develop and what change it is you're focusing on. Too often, leadership teams are trying to change everything. And the alignment I create is basic physics, really. If I've got a desk in front of me, if I try and take a big block of wood and hammer it into the desk, it's not going to go very far. If I take a nail and focus the same force onto that, it'll go straight into the desk.
Right.
So I get them to really, and there's a lot of resistance here because they want to do everything, but get them to realize, well, if we could really get aligned behind the one thing that's most important for us to really deliver this year. And yeah, there's other stuff going on. I'm not pretending that there isn't,
Mm.
but this is the one thing that we're really aligned on making happen. Then again, you align the force behind that. Too many leadership teams end up going a mile wide and an inch deep.
Right.
But you line up the force behind that. And the progress, what's interesting about it is the progress and the momentum that they start to build by being focused as a team actually allows the other stuff to start to happen because it can become sort of self-perpetuating. And then in terms of um so that's the sort of the focus element. In terms of them being the best that they can be and how they work with their people,
Mm.
there's some really powerful stuff that you can think about. By the way, there's lots of elements. I'm just picking out some parts. But there's some key parts to think about in terms of communication, because the way in which we communicate with our teams will either develop them or it will deplete them.
Right.
And I get them to communicate with their teams both on a one-to-one basis and a team basis, where they're starting to draw the answers from the team and develop and strengthen the team in the process, rather than dishing out the instructions and telling everybody what they need to do.
Right.
Seeing how the interactions they have, they develop the team in the process. So developing them becomes a natural process.
Okay.
It becomes second thought. And what that gives you then is a team that are constantly getting better and better. It's built into the way that they work together.
Yeah.
Those are just some examples. There's lots more that we could talk about that I would bring into a team to make a shift. But once you get that right, as an example of one team that I worked with, they set themselves, their problem was growth. They set themselves a 3-year stretch target, and it was a stretch target. In
Yeah.
3 years, this is the extent to which we want to grow. Well, by reaching the level of alignment that we got them to, they exceeded that in less than 12 months.
Right.
That's what you can do
Yeah.
if you create alignment.
Mm. Brilliant. And you mentioned the reason part of it as well. Can you give us a bit more depth?
So, well, like I said, and the reason part. Sorry, uh, I'm bouncing around a little bit here. I would say, in terms of the reason part, that's where I'd bring in the focus element
Right.
of what it is we're focused about, what is it we're trying to achieve, and actually, what is the one thing that's most important this year? It's a really interesting question to ask in a leadership team. So, in this next 12 months, what's the most important thing that we need to achieve? And I guarantee you'll get more answers than there are people in the team.
Definitely. I think one of the most uncomfortable exercises that I do with people is when there's elements of, right, we're going to do a forced rank here. So, we've got these 10 things that you say we need to do. Only one of them can be at the top of the list. And it can be a very uncomfortable thing for people, can't it?
It is, and what often happens, I know when I worked for 3M, this was a terrible technique that was used. People just end up recategorizing things, so it looks like there's fewer things when really they're the same number. Interestingly enough, I forget the exact dates, but when the word priority came out, it was singular. There was
Okay.
no such thing as priorities
Yeah.
because it means the thing that's on top.
Right.
And I think the plural version didn't come out till the 1940s.
Very interesting indeed. Yeah, I think a lesson for us all on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, and I've just written down there. I love a good acronym or something like that. In CPR, there's plenty of teams and businesses that need a good bit of CPR in terms of their connection potential and their reason as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I love it. Um, Brilliant. And what sort of you sort of said about organizational size there. Do you specialize in any industries, or do you find this approach works no matter what sort of an industry or background the people you're working with are from?
Yes, as in it does work across all areas, whether it's public or private sector, whatever industry it is. More and more, I'm becoming more interested in focusing my own professional services industries.
Okay.
So that's where I find myself focusing my attention. However, the principles work across all areas and across all leadership teams.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a difficult thing, isn't it? Of particularly when you're a small organisation or even an individual yourself as a practitioner, you can't be it all for everyone, and it's often about where you want to take things, what gives you the energy and the drive, and where you get the best results. So
Yeah,
yeah, lessons for
absolutely.
us there. Oh, brilliant! And so you've been doing this. Did you say 2012? You've been.
So independent, I mean, obviously I was doing a lot of these things before in paid employment, but yeah, I've been doing this independently since 2012. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I mean that's a huge amount of experience and stories I'm sure you could tell there. But in terms of the things that keep you motivated and the things that keep you on top of your game, what do you do to help yourself perform? Because I think this is a key element to anyone who's helping others perform. They need to be on top of their own game as well. So what are the sort of things that you do to keep yourself on top?
So I'm going to give you I'm going to give you three answers to that question. Two of them are positive and one of them is negative. So I'm currently going through the process of finding ways to focus my energy and attention doing more of what I love and outsourcing all the stuff that drains me.
Right.
So that's the current project that I'm working on, and
Nice.
so I'll get to the point that it's just about the conversations that I have. It's just about the events that I run. It's just about the talks that I give,
Mm.
and I focus my attention on those, and everything else just sort of magically falls into place for me. So that's a current goal for me because we spend too much of our time doing stuff that we hate. And the beauty of being an entrepreneur is that good news, you're your own boss, bad news, you're your own boss, but the
Yeah.
good news is I can make those choices. I can invest elsewhere to
Mm.
make sure that I don't have to do the things that I don't want to do. So that's probably the number one at the moment.
Yeah.
The other one is to have something that's beyond you and beyond the business. Now, obviously, family is a core part of that.
Mm.
Um, I'm a Christadelphian. I'm part of a community there. It's actually a lay community. We don't have any paid clergy or anything like that. We run it all ourselves, and I'm a part of that, and that gives me quite a special community to be a part of.
Right.
And it's something really key to help you focus beyond yourself and beyond your immediate needs or those of your clients.
Mm.
And I think that element and the spiritual element that comes from that is a really important part of what I do. The negative one, then I'd say is the physical one because it's time for me to get back on track with this, and I'm working on some of it. But a couple of years ago, I had an accident where I fell off a ladder and damaged my spine. I was in a bit of a mess, to be honest. And before that, I used to cycle, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week.
Mm.
I used to love it. And I've probably cycled about a dozen times since that
Right.
accident. And that's one of the things. I mean, they talk literally about getting back on your bike again, don't they? So I need to get back on my bike. And I think, well, if I can get that right, it's the perfect time of year. So to refocus my energy on making that happen, that would be a really cool thing for me because it clears my head.
Yeah.
I feel physically better as a result. And there's a few pounds that I've added on recently that would actually start to shed if I was a little bit more active as well. So there's perhaps three answers: two positive and one that needs work.
Brilliant. And I think so many lessons for everyone within that, myself and the audience as well, in terms of, what I heard from there is, focus on the things that you love doing. and find ways to sort of delegate, move out, those things that aren't giving you joy and passion and driving your own performance. Have something wider and bigger than yourself that you can focus on, something different that allows you to connect with other people and to do something that's beyond just your own focus and beyond your day-to-day operation as well. And then the final one is that it always comes back is that physical exercise, the movement, no matter what it is, a short walk, a getting outside, all the way through to cycling, climbing mountains, doing triathlons, whatever it is that drives you there. But those things, and I'm the same, by the way, I'm very much in terms of I always want to do more after I've done it, and it's just getting the stage of doing it because it does you good. So yeah, it's
Always.
lots of great stuff out there. Now, I did want to touch back a little bit though, because I talked about the TEDx talk and the piece you did there, but can you give us a bit of a flavour? I'll put the connection, the link into the show notes so that people can listen because it is a fantastic talk. But can you just give us an overview as to what that's all about and sort of because it does tie in with a lot of what you do right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's when it comes to leadership, you can get to the point where with all the research that's been done nowadays, the feeling is, well, actually, if you do these 100 things, you'll be a fantastic leader. And even if you manage to master those 100 things, as soon as your back's turned, somebody's added another 50.
Right.
So it's become this almost impossible expectation, the degree of complexity that surrounds leadership. I passionately believe the work that's been done over the years should have made it clearer, and we've just confused it.
Right.
If I speak to 20 different experts on leadership, I'll get 40 models.
Right.
And you try and piece all of that together, and you get some sort of incredibly complex chemical formula you need to be a university professor to understand. This is why people think you need to do an MBA to understand leadership.
Right.
And it is just so wrong.
Mm.
I passionately believe that whilst leadership is not easy, it is simple. And everything we need to know about leadership comes down to two rules. And once we get those two rules right, everything starts to fall into place. And the way I would put this, I would describe this is a little bit like if you think of your computer, there's all sorts of software and programs you load onto your computer.
Mm.
Great. Okay. Some of them are better than others. Some of them you use, some of them you never get to. You sort of think, oh, that could be useful. I'll load it on, and then lo and behold, you haven't used it in 3 years. But what I'm interested when it comes to leadership is not the programs that we load in, although there's some very useful programs you can load in. It's the operating system.
Right.
Because when your operating system isn't right, everything crashes all the time. Nothing works.
Yeah.
Whether it's the blue screen of death or the spinning beach ball, whatever it is, where things have stopped and not working, we see it time and time on our computers. Actually, that's what I deal with from a leadership perspective, because what you've got to get right is the mindset of leadership. That's the operating system. And the mindset of leadership is based squarely on these two rules. When you really adopt these two rules, and it's not enough to know them, by the way. People, oh yeah, I know what those rules are. I've heard Peter talk about them before. You have to get them,
Right.
and you have to apply them to get the value.
Uh, and I take it if people want to know what those two rules are, the thing to do is listen to your TED talk, right?
Well, I guess it's a place to start, isn't it? And I'll tell you, let's start for start for 10. Rule number one. And if we had time, if we had more time, I could prove it to you. But rule number one of leadership says it's not about you. That's the first thing that any leader needs to understand. It's about them. The critical thing to get our heads around what rule number one says to us is it's not our job as leaders to deliver the result. Our job is delivering the team who deliver the result.
Right.
And whilst there are times when we're in a crisis and we need to get down into the trenches and roll up our sleeves and make it happen, which absolutely I'm behind doing when we need to do that. If we're always down there in the trenches with the team doing the stuff, who's working out how to get out the trenches? And fundamentally, we have to recognize there's a shift in mindset. My job isn't delivering the result. It's not all about my ideas or my way of doing things or my ego or me getting it over the line. Actually, I know whether I'm dealing with an outstanding leader by looking at the team. not by looking at the leader.
Mm,
And that's all based on rule number one. And when any of you, anybody listening to this podcast reflects back on the best leaders and the worst leaders that they've ever worked with, the difference is always rule number one. For the worst leaders, it was all about them.
right.
For the best leaders, their focus was on the team
Mm.
and making the team become the best that it can be and getting it to the right place.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree more on this one. I think this is absolutely fundamental, not only in the rule itself, but also, just the whole approach to the fact that it is mindset. Mindset needs to shift if you want to move from getting things done to helping a team get things done. That's a
Yes, stop searching for the silver bullet, the new
yeah,
tool and technique that will solve all your leadership problems,
yeah,
and shift your mindset. And that begins with rule number one. Without, if you think about this, you end up in this scenario where imagine if a conductor sacked the entire orchestra, 3 days before their main performance because the conductor decided they could play the individual parts better.
right.
Or the football manager who runs onto the pitch 15 minutes into the match to take striker's position. Or perish the thought, the business leader who recruits talented people and then ends up doing the work themselves.
Surely that would never happen.
Surely never. Surely never. That's people who've tripped over rule number one. And if you're at the point where you feel like things only work when you're there,
Yeah,
if you're the only one who gets it, you're the only one who cares, and you worry about taking annual leave because you've got no idea what you're coming back to, and quite frankly, you're spending hours on your email whilst you're away, then you've tripped over rule number one. And the secret is to get back to rule number one. I help leaders do that. I help leaders create a team that deliver whether the leader is there or not. And the shift there for the leader and for the team is almost magical.
brilliant. Um, so let's move on a little bit in terms of if you could help any sort of individual or team or organization with the skill set you got, who would you want to really make an impact on?
So, so for a few years, I've been focusing on the mid-sized organization, with sort of hundreds rather than thousands of employees.
Yeah.
But what I'm starting to realize more and more, this goes back to something we touched on earlier, that there's a number of entrepreneurs that have started really interesting businesses,
Mm,
but it all depends on them. And they've built a team, it could be, 10, 20, 50 people, it could be in the hundreds. Things only work when they're there.
right.
They can never switch off. They can never take a break. They can never go and do something else. And rather than actually going into business on their own to create freedom, they're shackled to the business. Well, I can change all of that. When leaders work with me, we create an incredible shift
Mm,
that takes them off in a totally different direction. And in fact, one of my coaching clients, we were just having a conversation earlier today. Two things actually are interesting goals for him. One is he's going to take a month off later this year without taking his laptop.
yeah.
That's not something he could ever have considered 6 months ago. And the second one is he set himself a date by which he's actually going to leave the UK and set up a new branch of his business elsewhere whilst the UK branch continues to deliver without him, which
Super.
I think is a really brilliant idea. So he wants to set it up so it'll all run, it'll all still happen, and he's off doing something else.
Brilliant. Awesome stuff. And let's switch that around a little bit then and say if you could sit down and have a coffee, have a drink, have a meal with somebody who you think could really help you up your game and lift your performance, who would you want that to be?
You mentioned this briefly before we started the call, and I've struggled with this, and I think there are two answers that I would give to this. One of them will make sense to a lot of people, and won't make sense to a lot of people as well. So practically, there's a really old book called From Good to Great. You're probably familiar with it, by Jim Collins,
Yes.
and there's so much timeless wisdom in there
Mm,
that I think is incredible. I'd love to sit down and have a chat, have a coffee with him about how he went through that entire process, and particularly the story about how he understood level 5 leadership and the ultimate leadership that came through from there. And the other one, of course, given what I said to you early on about my background, would be Jesus, because the principles that he taught, he taught about the principle that if anybody would be great amongst you, let them be your servant. And he he fundamentally, that's rule number one of leadership. We've got to stop looking at organizations, and we've been talking about this for years, haven't we? Stop looking at organizations as a pyramid with the top person at the top and invert the whole thing and recognize their job is supporting everybody else who's ultimately supporting the people that they're working with on the coal face.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many principles that I could pick up in a conversation there. That would be something special indeed.
Yeah, I'm sure. Fantastic. And if you were to then leave the audience with one key sort of thing to think about, one key point about helping themselves perform or helping their teams perform, what would be one key point from today's conversation?
So I'll take this as a build on rule number one says it's not your job to deliver the result. It's your job to deliver the team who deliver the result.
Mm.
And if you haven't created a team that can function without you, then you haven't succeeded as a leader. So what I would say is there's a really useful question to ask when people come to you for a solution, because often they do.
Yep.
It's easier just to give the answer sometimes, isn't it? And just to say, here's the answer. Here's what we're going to do, whatever it is. But of course, the more that happens, the more you get back, weighed down by all of this stuff that you end up carrying
Yes.
as a result. A really neat little question to ask people when they come to you with something like that is to say, what would you do if I wasn't here and you couldn't get a hold of me? And my advice is if the answer they give you is okay,
Yeah.
not a car crash, if it's okay, then say, great. Do that. Now, the temptation is just to say, oh, well, I'd do this, or and you could do that, or and you can do the other. Go with what they own and what they suggest. Afterwards, you can talk with them about what else they could have done and where it could have gone, but get them to the point that they own it and not you. And I would say that little question, what would you do if I wasn't here? Is probably one of the most powerful questions any leader can ask.
Yeah, really powerful question. And I love that add-on in terms of just go with that if it's good enough, because I think the temptation as a leader is to at that point get people to do more, and that's a crucial element in terms of
and you see this in leadership. I've seen, there's one of my coaching clients has made a huge shift, but I describe him as cursed, but not as you would expect, actually. This is somebody who's cursed by the fact that he was genuinely better at everything that his team did.
Right.
And this is not him being conceited. It was patently obvious. He's that good. But he was like, if you picture like a Hollywood film where they're in a high-end restaurant and you've got this master chef there, and everything comes through him or her.
Right.
And they make everything better. There's a little stir here, a little addition there. And what happens at that point is you become the bottleneck for the team. That's exactly where he was. And he's created a massive shift now as a result. In fact, I bumped into one of his team at a conference a few months ago. It was a bit awkward because I couldn't talk about what we'd been doing, but she'd obviously knew I'd been working with him. He must have said. And she said, thank you for what you've done, because the impact on him and on the team has been phenomenal. And that all came back to recognizing that, well, whilst he could make everything better, and people used to bring everything to him to make it better, he just became the bottleneck and he made himself and everybody else miserable. It's not the way to go. It doesn't work.
Brilliant. What a lesson. And finally then, how do people find out more? How do they connect with you? Where do we point them?
So I would say definitely link up with me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
So that's a place to connect, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I could do more, but I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn. I'll be on there a few times a week. And the other thing I would say is, and I know you're going to put the link in the show notes, but I've created a leadership self-assessment that's really, really simple, but very, very powerful. Ask some really important questions. You can self-evaluate yourself using these questions, and the process will create a report for you. And you can find that at www.theinspirometer.com.
The Inspirometer, and I will have that along with your LinkedIn profile and things like that. We'll have that in the show notes, and also a link to the original leadership 3-day course that you mentioned, so people can get
absolutely. And we get some fantastic results there, all by building the mindset and then adding everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, what a lesson, and what a way to end. Let's focus on the mindset. Let's help ourselves perform and help others to perform through it. So, so much great stuff. Really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much for the amazing insights today, Peter Anderton.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks so much. Cheers now.
Take care. All the best.
Bye. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.